You know, I've never been one for drama, not really. I keep to my land, I keep to my cattle, and I make damn sure I keep to what's mine. That's just the quiet, unwritten law out here on the plains. 120 acres of stubborn, sun-baked Texas soil, scratched out of limestone and pride, passed down from my grandfather in 1931. This land, it remembers. It remembers the dust bowl and the fence posts that held through the biggest storms. It remembers the honest work of 100 years of boot prints and hooves. And now it remembers the day some HOA pencil pusher decided he was going to test the boundary between flimsy, glossy paperwork and good, solid steel wire. It all started when I put up a new fence. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing aggressive, just a clean, strong line of treated cedar with a steel core, mounted tight along the northern edge of my property, right where the new development, Clear Hill Acres, had started sprawling like a skin rash across the horizon. That fence ran a solid 500 yards, parallel to a slick new road the developers had cut right through what used to be perfectly good grazing land. I wasn't taking chances, so I installed cameras every 50 feet, solar-powered rig I built myself, and hung bright signs every 10, private property. No trespassing. Video surveillance. You'd think that would be clear enough for a 5-year-old, let alone a grown man wearing $1,000 sunglasses, but no, not for them. The first letter came in a pristine white envelope, embossed, folded so sharply it looked like a diplomatic summons. It was signed by a fellow named Bradley Sloan, president of the Clear Hill Acres Homeowners Association. I hadn't heard of him, and I certainly hadn't heard of his HOA. The letter, written in the most flowery, ridiculous corporate speak you can imagine, informed me that my visual barrier violated Section 4.2.2 of their neighborhood covenant, and ordered me to remove all non-compliant fencing structures within 30 days to preserve aesthetic harmony. I just laughed out loud, sitting at my kitchen table, my black coffee still steaming. 30 days. They could have asked me to move a mountain, and I'd have taken that threat more seriously. I didn't respond. I figured they'd checked the wrong box in their giant file of identical houses, mailed it to the wrong man, and that would be the end of it. I figured wrong. Again. The second letter arrived 2 weeks later, thicker this time, printed on stiff legal stationery. It cited continued violation, non-response, and warned of future enforcement. It even included a map, a blurry satellite image with a ridiculous red outline traced right over my land, as if my 120 acres suddenly belonged to their suburban dream. Now, that one got a response. I wrote back on lined notebook paper, in all caps, just to make the reader wince. I explained, clearly and simply, that my property was not, has never been, and never would be part of Clear Hill Acres. I attached a pristine copy of my deed and my county parcel registration, showing the boundary lines going back to before World War II. I signed it simple, Clay Banner, owner. Independent as hell. God bless Texas. A week passed, then two. I thought, maybe, just maybe, they finally got the message. But trouble doesn't always knock politely. Sometimes it climbs. One afternoon, I was down in my lower pasture replacing a water valve when I got a notification ping from my motion sensor. Camera feed pulled up on my phone showed 2 men in those ridiculous matching HOA polos standing right at the northern fence line, snapping pictures like they were documenting a felony. Then, one of them started climbing the fence. I didn't say anything. The big no trespassing sign was right there. I just saved the footage. A few days later, while checking the perimeter after a windstorm, I noticed the top strand of fence wire had been cut. A clean slice, about shoulder height. Someone had used bolt cutters right beneath one of my posted signs. I pulled the video footage, and there he was, one of the same fellas from before, crawling along the fence line like a possum with a clipboard. I made my first police report that evening. Officer Judson came by, a good man who understood the difference between trespass and loose cattle. He watched the footage, whistled low, and shook his head. That's straight-up criminal trespass, Clay. And damaging that fence? Property destruction, plain and simple. You know what the worst part is? I asked him. They act like they're doing me a favor. Like they're the neighborhood law. He chuckled. HOA types. They forget where the pavement ends. I wasn't angry yet. Not truly. This was more insulting than dangerous, but I could feel it. The edge of something sharp, that suburban conformity, pressing in, trying to tell the country boy how to live. And I'll tell you this, I don't start fights. But if one shows up at my gate pretending to be law, I finish it. And that's when I knew I needed to stop playing defense. I believe a man's word is his bond, but apparently, that concept's gone extinct in Clear Hill Acres. After the fence-cutting incident, I figured they'd stopped. But no. Every Tuesday morning, a new, glossy envelope showed up with increasingly dramatic language. Escalating noncompliance, public safety risk, hostile barrier. They used phrases like community integrity and visual pollution, which meant they hated the sight of my working farm. But the one that broke me was the fourth letter. That one claimed I'd installed an electrically hazardous structure incompatible with neighborhood safety standards. Funny thing was, my fence didn't even have juice yet. The fact that they were lying and calling a wooden wire fence dangerous told me everything I needed to know. They weren't just ignorant. They were actively building a fictional case against me. I decided to get ahead of their fantasy. I took my deed and my parcel map down to the county clerk's office. Miss Roberta, who's known my family forever, pulled up the official zoning database. "You're not in their HOA footprint, Clay," she confirmed, spinning the monitor toward me. "Never were. They're overreaching, plain and simple." I had her laminate the proof and mailed a copy to Bradley Sloan with a bright orange sticky note. "Stop trespassing. You're out of your jurisdiction." Wrong again. A couple of nights later, just before midnight, another motion alert. Grainy black and white, infrared, but clear enough. Someone creeping along the north side of the property. Bolt cutters. Again. I watched, jaw tight, as he clipped the top line. He started to climb through. What he didn't know was I'd replaced that section with a decoy wire, non-functional, but rigged with a tiny die pack. The next morning, I found a bright orange splotch smeared across one of the fence posts like a warning sign from God. That's when I knew this wasn't just corporate overreach. This was sabotage. This was personal. I printed the footage again and filed a second police report. "Y'all going to war over this fence, Clay?" Officer Judson asked. "I'm not going to war," I told him, looking out at the uniform symmetry of their subdivision. "But I will make damn sure they remember where my line is." And with that, I got to work. If there's one thing I learned in the military, it's that defense without deterrence is just an invitation. These HOA boys didn't get the message from a wooden fence and a few printed maps. Fine. I had other tools. The next week, I initiated the upgrade. I installed a full parametric livestock electrification system. Standard issue for cattle containment in dry Texas terrain. Certified legal. Designed to deliver a non-lethal zap, strong enough to make a 2,000-pound bull think twice. I tied it into my solar grid, grounded it right, and posted reflective warning signs every 10 feet. Electric fence. Agricultural use. Do not touch. I wasn't trying to hurt anybody. I just wanted them to think twice before hopping my fence again. And maybe, just maybe, it would remind a few yuppies what it means to live next to a working ranch. 2 days after I flipped the switch, I got my first reaction. It was about 10 in the morning. I was fixing an irrigation line when I heard it. A yelp, followed by some real creative cussing. I checked the feed on my tablet. 2 HOA patrol members were trying to peek through a knothole. One leaned in, hand on the upper rail, and zap. Clean contact. Enough to make him jump like he'd touched a toaster in a bathtub. I watched them scramble back to the curb like spooked deer, both red-faced and muttering. A few hours later, a black SUV pulled up. Out stepped Bradley Sloan himself. Pressed slacks, designer sunglasses, holding a leather folio like he was about to sue me into the Stone Age. I met him at the end of my drive with a mug of black coffee and the biggest grin I could manage. "Mr. Banner," he said, frowning. "We need to talk." "Finally," I said. "Thought you were just going to keep sending love letters. We've received several complaints about a hazardous electric barrier you've installed. You're creating an unsafe environment for nearby families." I took a slow sip of coffee. It's a certified agricultural fence. Every foot of it within my legal rights under the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Protection Act, Section 117, if you want to check. And no, I'm not part of your HOA. My land's older than your bylaws. He looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. Be that as it may, your setup poses a clear risk. We're prepared to escalate this through civil court if necessary. Funny, I said, because I've already filed 2 police reports for trespass and vandalism. I've got footage of your guys hopping fences and cutting wires. Want to see the clips? Just then, a news van pulled up. Some eager local reporter had caught wind of the story. Is it true, the kid called out, that the homeowners association tried to force a farmer to remove his fence even though he's not in the HOA? Bradley paled. I smiled. It's true, I said loud enough for the mic. They're real enthusiastic about their aesthetic harmony, not so much about property rights. Bradley muttered something and got back in his SUV. The segment aired that night. Farm fence sparks, suburban firestorm. They even included a freeze frame of the HOA guy getting zapped. I sat on the porch with my dog and a beer, watching the sunset. The wire hummed low in the distance, steady, quiet, constant. I figured they'd back off. Instead, they lawyered up. The summons came by courier. Clear Hill Acres Homeowners Association versus Clay Banner. They were suing me, claiming I'd created an environmental hazard, a public safety risk, and my personal favorite, an aggressive rural deterrent inconsistent with community values. I didn't panic. I called Daniel Torres, my buddy from my military comms unit, now a property rights attorney in Austin. He looked over the complaint, snorted, and grinned. They want to sue a legally zoned agricultural property outside their jurisdiction? Clay, let's bury them. We prepared our counterclaim. Trespassing, destruction of property, harassment, coercion. Daniel called it rural racketeering. But before we could file, Bradley Sloan came back. Alone this time, mid-morning, no folio, just desperation clinging to his shirt. I'd like to speak with you privately, he said. I let him follow me to the barn. He took off his glasses. Look, this isn't personal. It's just business. What if we made this all go away? No court, no drama. I can arrange for a developer to purchase a portion of your northern lot. You get a solid payout. He was offering a bribe, a coerced buyout. Hell, we'll even rename the development Banner Estates. Give your family name a legacy. I stepped closer. You know, my grandfather told your dad to shove it when he tried the same thing in '94. Showed up with a tie and a handshake, called it a generational opportunity. My granddad ran him off with a shotgun and a peach pit in his shoe. Bradley chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Some things never change, huh? No, I said. Some things stay exactly the way they should. He nodded slowly and left. The next day, Daniel filed our counterclaim. We included video of the fence cutting, the trespassing, and the audio recording of Bradley's offer to make it all go away. Texas law isn't fond of coercion under threat of legal action. The courthouse smelled like lemon floor wax and disappointment. The courtroom was packed. Daniel, cool as ever, sipped coffee from a battered thermos. The HOA's lawyer started laying it on thick, claiming my fence posed an imminent hazard and created psychological discomfort. Daniel waited his turn. Your Honor, my client is a cattle rancher. His fence was installed on his property with state-certified equipment. The HOA has no jurisdiction over his land. In fact, they've committed multiple instances of trespass, property damage, and attempted coercion. Then he dropped the first bomb, the laminated county parcel maps, proving beyond dispute that my property never fell under the HOA's governance. Judge Evelyn Hart held up the map. Mr. Sloan, your claim states the northern boundary includes Mr. Banner's parcel, but according to this, it stops approximately 43 feet short. Care to explain? Bradley Sloan couldn't talk his way out of a county record. Next came the video evidence. The man in the HOA vest sneaking along my fence line, snipping the wire. Gasps filled the courtroom. Then Daniel played the audio. Bradley's voice, smooth as syrup. We can make this all go away. A developer I know could take the north strip off your hands. When it ended, you could hear someone whisper, he's toast. The judge called for a short recess. Bradley's legal team huddled in the hallway, their perfect hair starting to wilt. An hour later, the court reconvened for the verdict. Judge Hart was concise. It is clear that Mr. Banner's property lies outside the jurisdiction of the Clear Hill Acres Homeowners Association. Furthermore, the association engaged in unauthorized surveillance, physical trespass, and acts of intimidation under false legal pretense. She turned to me. Mr. Banner, you are awarded $135,000 in compensation for legal expenses, property damage, and emotional distress. Then she turned to the HOA. Clear Hill Acres is ordered to issue a formal apology and will be subject to a permanent injunction prohibiting any future regulatory attempts on Mr. Banner's property. Bradley looked like he'd just swallowed a live bee. I stood there, hands in my pockets, not gloating, just grounded, like fence posts sunk deep in Texas clay. Outside the courthouse, a handful of reporters waited. I gave them a wave and said one thing before climbing into my truck. Sometimes you got to electrify a fence to remind folks it's there. The judge's ruling forced the HOA to do what they hated most: apologize publicly. The media ran follow-up segments. Within a week, several HOA members turned on Bradley, and he was forced to resign. The best part, though, was the community that formed around the conflict. I got calls from a few good neighbors who apologized, and one even baked me a pecan pie. But the most important call was from Harold Kim, a young rancher whose family farm was under similar pressure. I invited him down. We walked the fence line together. I showed him the wire, the cameras, the laminated zoning maps still clipped to the post. This fence isn't just wire and voltage, Harold, I told him. It's proof. You've got to know your lines, hold them tight, and never let someone with a clipboard and a smile talk you out of what's yours. By Sunday, we'd mapped out the fence line network for other landowners dealing with the same HOA aggression. Daniel offered legal templates pro bono. The county commissioner's office quietly updated its policy to include stronger protections for agricultural landowners against encroaching HOAs. I used some of the settlement money to build a new barn. Nothing fancy, but built sturdy. Harold and two other fellas from the network came down to help. We built it fast, drank cheap beer when it was done, and carved our initials into one of the support beams. The media attention faded, but the point had been made. Even local legislators took note. One morning in late fall, I was walking the property at sunrise when I saw a little boy standing at the fence line with his dad. "Is this the electric one, Daddy?" the kid asked. The dad nodded. "Yep, that's the fence that made the TV." I tipped my hat, walked over, and said, "I just reminded them where their neighborhood ends." Later that night, sitting on the porch, I heard coyotes howling. The wind rustled the mesquite trees, and I took a sip of my beer, feeling that low hum of the fence out there. Steady, patient, waiting. They came at me with bylaws and board meetings. I answered with steel, voltage, and a copy of the Texas Property Code. They wanted a uniform neighborhood. I gave them a legacy. This strip of dirt is mine, and it always will be. So, tell me, was installing the electric fence too much? Or was that the only language a power-tripping HOA president like Bradley Sloan would ever truly understand? Was it an aggressive deterrent? Or was it self-defense? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Drop a like, subscribe for more stories, and tell me, what is the craziest thing you've ever had to do to defend your property line?